In February 2009, in a quiet Florida town where little ever seemed to disturb the night, a 5-year-old girl vanished from her own bedroom. There was no scream that pierced the darkness, no shattered glass on the floor, no unmistakable signs of a violent break-in. When morning came, there was only an empty bed and a stillness that felt unnaturally heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The disappearance of Haleigh Cummings soon became one of the most unsettling cold cases in America. Yet this was never just a missing child report. It evolved into a story of strained relationships, conflicting statements, and suspicions that slowly divided a quiet community. What truly happened inside that modest mobile home before dawn, and why does the truth still remain out of reach? As investigators revisited timelines and re-examined accounts, each lead seemed to raise new doubts. With no definitive evidence and no resolution, the case endures a shadow that time has not erased. Satsuma, Florida rests quietly in Putnam County, framed by flat roads, modest homes, and long stretches of still air. Neighbors recognize each other's trucks before faces, and some doors remain unlocked at night. Children ride bikes until dusk without constant supervision. On the surface it looks like rural, calm, predictable, familiar, safe. But small towns do not erase complexity. They condense it. Beneath routine lie financial strain, addiction, resentment, and private conflicts. In places like Satsuma, tension rarely erupts loudly. It settles quietly behind closed doors. In early 2009, nothing about Satsuma suggested it was about to become the center of national attention. There were no signs of imminent tragedy. There was no looming storm. The stillness felt ordinary, and that is what makes what happened next so unsettling. When disruption comes to a quiet place, it does not just break routine. It fractures identity. It forces neighbors to question how well they ever truly knew each other. At the center of this quiet world was a 5-year-old girl named Haleigh Cummings. She was small for her age, with light hair and a soft, watchful expression. People described her as affectionate and protective of her younger brother. She liked dolls. She liked attention. She liked being near the adults she trusted. There was nothing extraordinary about her life, and that ordinariness is part of what makes her absence so profound. Haleigh lived with her father, Ronald Cummings, in a modest mobile home. Also living there was his 17-year-old girlfriend, Misty Croslin. Haleigh's biological mother did not reside in the home, and custody arrangements had placed daily care primarily in her father's hands. The household was young, unstable, and navigating adult pressures that exceeded its emotional resources. There is an important psychological dimension to Haleigh's profile. Reports indicated she had minor health concerns that required attentiveness. She was not a child who could simply be overlooked. She relied on the adults around her for structure and protection, and that dependency increases the emotional weight of the case. A dependent child does not orchestrate her own disappearance. A dependent child trusts. Ronald worked night shifts, often leaving in the late afternoon and returning before dawn. Night work creates distance inside families. It alters sleep cycles, increases irritability, and reduces supervision during critical hours. In households already under strain, such schedules can deepen emotional gaps. Fatigue becomes constant. Communication becomes reactive rather than thoughtful. Misty Croslin, at 17, occupied a complicated psychological space. She was not merely a babysitter. She was a teenager in a romantic relationship with an older man, living inside a household where she was expected to perform adult responsibilities. That dynamic alone introduces tension. Adolescence is a stage marked by identity formation, impulsivity, and emotional volatility. Adding parental duties to that stage can create internal fractures. Neighbors would later describe arguments between Ronald and Misty, raised voices, occasional conflicts spilling into the yard, financial strain, rumors of drug use circulating quietly among locals. None of these elements prove wrongdoing, but they paint a portrait of instability. And instability is fertile ground for poor decisions, misjudgments, and escalating emotional reactions. When analyzing environments where children disappear, investigators often examine stress clusters. These include financial insecurity, substance abuse, relational conflict, and lack of external oversight. In the Cummings household, several of these factors were present simultaneously. That does not assign guilt. It simply reveals vulnerability. Vulnerability changes how people respond under pressure. The mobile home was modest and unremarkable, with no security system or cameras guarding its doors. Its simple layout placed bedrooms close together, thin walls offering little insulation from sound. It was shaped by routine, not precaution. In communities like Satsuma, that absence of security feels normal. Familiarity is mistaken for safety, and danger is imagined as external. When something goes wrong, the mind resists the possibility that the threat was already inside. The financial stress weighed heavily on the household. Young adults juggling unstable work, bills, and childcare often function in survival mode, where immediate problems overshadow long-term consequences. Emotional reactions sharpen, and minor conflicts can escalate quickly under pressure. There were also rumors of drug activity within the broader social circle. Substance use can disrupt sleep, distort judgment, and intensify paranoia or aggression. Rumors are not proof, but environments shaped by addiction often normalize secrecy, and habitual secrecy clouds clarity. Haleigh's daily life unfolded inside this layered environment. She moved between adults navigating their own immaturity and stress. She depended on consistency in a household that may not have consistently provided it. Yet to neighbors, she was simply a child playing outside, holding hands with a brother, existing in plain sight. What is striking about cases like this is the contrast between public normalcy and private tension. From the street, nothing seemed extraordinary. A father working nights, a young girlfriend helping with childcare, children asleep before 9, the ordinary rhythm of rural American life. But human behavior is rarely defined by superstitions. Before that February night, there were no national cameras pointed at Satsuma. There were no investigative lights illuminating the corners of the mobile home. The arguments, if they occurred, remained localized. The stress remained internal. The secrets, if any existed, were known only to those inside the walls. Psychologically, this was the calm before rupture, not dramatic, but quiet and routine, layered over instability. Pressure built without a visible breaking point. Only afterward do observers ask how no one saw it coming. In truth, some saw fragments, arguments, tension, rumors, but fragments rarely form clear warnings until harm has already occurred. As night fell on Satsuma in February 2009, nothing outwardly seemed unusual. A father left for work. A teenage caregiver stayed behind. 2 children went to bed. The house settled into silence. And somewhere inside that quiet, beneath routine and unresolved tension, the conditions for an irreversible absence were already forming. On February 9, 2009, the day unfolded with no visible rupture. Haleigh Cummings left for his night shift around 3 p.m., following the rhythm that had become routine in the household. Nightwork structured his life around absence. By late afternoon, the responsibility for the children shifted entirely to Misty Crosland. The mobile home settled into its familiar evening quiet. According to Misty's initial account, the evening was ordinary. She said she fed the children, watched television, and put both Haleigh and her younger brother to bed around 8 p.m. There were no reported disturbances. No neighbors later described hearing screams or suspicious movement. No emergency calls were placed before dawn. If tension existed that evening, it remained contained within walls. From a psychological standpoint, ordinary evenings are difficult to dissect because they rely entirely on memory. Memory under stress is fragile. It bends around fear, guilt, confusion, and suggestion. When investigators reconstruct timelines, they depend on the clarity of people who may already be emotionally compromised. That vulnerability would become central to this case. Misty stated that after putting the children to sleep, she lay down herself. She later claimed she woke up during the night and noticed something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., on February 10, 2009, she called 911. Her voice sounded frantic. She reported that Haleigh was missing from her bed. She insisted that the back door was open and that a light inside the home had been left on. The image is stark. A child gone from her bed before dawn. A young caregiver alone. A door possibly left unsecured. What unsettled investigators was not only the disappearance, but the lack of disturbance. No broken locks, no shattered windows, no obvious signs of struggle disturbed the scene. In stranger abductions from inside a home, forced entry often leaves evidence. Here, it did not. That absence created an immediate divide. Either someone entered quietly, or events unfolded differently than first described. Misty's statements shifted over time. At different points, she described the door as locked. Later, she suggested it might not have been fully secured. She described waking up at different times. She offered slightly different sequences of events regarding when she noticed Haleigh was gone. These inconsistencies became central to public suspicion. Inconsistencies must be approached with caution. Trauma can distort memory, and a 17-year-old thrust into crisis may struggle to recall events clearly. Panic compresses time and fragments perception, yet repeated contradictions also invite another interpretation, intentional alteration. Investigators are forced to weigh both possibilities. When law enforcement arrived, the response escalated quickly. Deputies canvassed the area, K9 units tracked scent, helicopters scanned from above, and volunteers searched nearby woods and water. Every passing hour deepened urgency and fear. Ronald returned home to chaos. Cameras soon captured his visible anger and distress. In interviews, he publicly criticized Misty, questioning her account and demanding answers. His emotional intensity was unmistakable. Grief often manifests as anger, but anger directed at someone inside the household adds another psychological layer. It signals fracture rather than unity. When couples face crises together, they typically present a unified front, at least initially. In this case, fracture surfaced quickly. Ronald's hostility toward Misty suggested either genuine suspicion or the projection of internal panic. In high-stress events, individuals sometimes externalize blame to regain a sense of control. If someone else is responsible, the world feels less chaotic. Investigators also examined Ronald closely. Although his work schedule placed him away from the home during the critical hours, absence alone does not eliminate suspicion. Detectives reviewed phone records, reconstructed timelines, and searched for inconsistencies in his movements. In complex cases, assumptions about opportunity must be tested, not taken at face value. Inside the mobile home, evidence did not clearly suggest violent intrusion. The layout was intact, bedding undisturbed. A stranger would have needed speed and silence. No screams were reported. Silence, in such cases, becomes significant. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement noted that there were no confirmed sightings of Haleigh after she was put to bed. That detail compresses the window of uncertainty. If no independent witness can place her alive after 8 p.m., then the entire timeline depends on the statements of the adults inside the home. Over time, attention intensified around Misty. She underwent multiple interviews and reportedly failed a polygraph examination. Polygraphs are not definitive proof of deception, but they influence perception. Public opinion hardened quickly. A teenage caregiver in a fragile household became the focal point of suspicion. Rumors of drug involvement within the broader social circle complicated the picture. Substance use can cloud judgment, introduce risky associates, and create volatile situations. Each possibility widened a narrative without confirming any single truth. Yet no physical evidence directly tied anyone to violence. No forensic trace clearly revealed what occurred inside that bedroom. Psychologically, the question grew sharper. If there was no forced entry and no clear disruption, access required opportunity or trust. Unlocked doors invite chance, trust invites proximity, and proximity narrows the circle. As days turned into weeks, search efforts continued, but hope steadily thinned. In missing child cases, there is a quiet shift from rescue to recovery, and that transition changes everything. It alters the tone of press conferences, the weight of interviews, and the expressions on investigators' faces. The absence begins to feel permanent. At the center of this case remains a piercing question. If there was no forced entry, no visible chaos, and only a limited number of people with access that night, then who truly occupied that space while the world slept? Something irreversible happened inside that modest Satsuma home. Accident, intent, or intrusion unknown. But one fact endures. A 5-year-old vanished from a confined space without a logical explanation. And when logic fails, suspicion rushes in. In the days following Haleigh's disappearance, investigators moved quickly, but their focus narrowed almost immediately to the people inside the home. Law enforcement conducted repeated interviews with Misty Crosslin. Each session attempted to tighten the timeline, to isolate inconsistencies, to test whether her narrative would remain stable under pressure. Stability, in high-stakes interviews, often signals either truth or disciplined rehearsal. Misty reportedly failed a polygraph examination. While polygraphs are not admissible as definitive proof, they influence investigative direction. A failed test does not establish guilt, but it deepens scrutiny. It signals physiological stress when confronted with specific questions. Stress can emerge from deception, but it can also arise from fear, confusion, or the overwhelming weight of accusation. Ronald Cummings was not exempt from suspicion. His criminal history and alleged ties to drug culture became part of the public record. Investigators examined his background, his associates, and his communications. In missing child cases, law enforcement often begins with the immediate circle, not because of bias, but because statistics consistently point inward before they point outward. Despite intense scrutiny, no physical evidence directly connected either adult to an act of violence. There were no confirmed blood traces, no forensic proof of struggle, no body recovered. The absence of physical evidence placed the investigation into a psychological domain. When tangible proof is scarce, behavior becomes evidence, tone becomes evidence, inconsistency becomes evidence. As the case expanded beyond Satsuma, national media descended on the town. Cable networks amplified every development. Programs such as Nancy Grace dissected interviews, replayed 911 calls, and analyzed body language. What had begun as a local tragedy transformed into a televised mystery. Public perception began forming faster than the facts could stabilize. Media exposure changes the psychological environment of a case. Under intense public scrutiny, individuals may alter behavior consciously or unconsciously. Some become defensive. Others over-explain. Some retreat into silence. Each reaction is interpreted as meaningful. In reality, high visibility creates emotional distortion. People behave differently when they know millions are watching. Pressure within the family intensified. Ronald's public frustration with Misty sharpened. Extended relatives became vocal. Divisions formed not only in the household but in the broader community. Supporters and skeptics chose sides. In small towns, social fractures ripple quickly. Loyalty and suspicion begin competing for dominance. Rumors began circulating about drug debts, dangerous acquaintances, and even theories of child trafficking. None of these claims were substantiated by solid evidence, yet repetition gives rumors psychological weight. In environments where information is scarce, speculation becomes narrative, and narrative often fills the silence left by official restraint. For Misty, the psychological pressure must have been immense. A teenager placed at the center of a national investigation experiences isolation differently than an adult. Developmentally, adolescents are still forming coping mechanisms. They are more prone to impulsivity and emotional swings. Under interrogation and media scrutiny, inconsistency can amplify simply because emotional regulation is limited. Ronald's later arrest on drug-related charges, unrelated directly to Haleigh's disappearance, further complicated perception. Even though the charges did not establish involvement in the child's case, they reinforced the image of instability. Public opinion tends to merge unrelated misconduct into a single moral narrative. Once credibility erodes, every action is viewed through suspicion. Investigators pursued leads relentlessly, interviewing acquaintances, searching properties, and reviewing tips nationwide. Yet every path met the same barrier: no body, no definitive forensic link, no confession backed by evidence. The case remained suspended between possibility and proof. Years later, inmates claimed Misty made incriminating remarks while jailed on unrelated charges. Such statements are often unreliable and require corroboration. Still, they reignited public attention and reopened old questions. Accident, intrusion, or a secret withheld from the start, none confirmed. From a psychological standpoint, prolonged unsolved cases alter collective memory. The original facts blur. Emotional impressions remain sharper than evidence. Misty became, in many minds, synonymous with suspicion. Ronald became associated with instability. Over time, perception hardens into assumption, even when courts have not established guilt. Investigators often describe unsolved cases as exercises in patience. They require revisiting evidence with fresh eyes, applying evolving forensic technologies, and waiting for new testimony. However, patience does not ease grief. For families, time compounds suffering. For communities, it erodes certainty. For suspects, it freezes identity in unresolved limbo. In this case, the central tension persists. There was opportunity inside the home. There were inconsistencies in statements. There were rumors of drugs and unstable relationships. Yet none of these elements crossed the threshold into provable homicide or confirmed abduction. The absence of a body prevents definitive closure. Behavioral analysis suggests that when harm occurs inside a domestic space, concealment can follow swiftly. Panic distorts judgment, and fear of consequences may override moral instinct. Still, patterns indicate probability, not proof. They guide investigators, but cannot secure conviction. The possibility of an external abductor, though statistically less common, remains open. Rural settings offer vulnerability through unlocked doors, yet entering an occupied home demands unusual risk tolerance, silence, and precision. As years passed, hope turned toward advancing technology. DNA databases grew, forensic tools sharpened, and cold case units revisited preserved evidence. Yet without new material proof, the case remained suspended. Suspicion lingered like heavy Florida humidity, persistent and unresolved. At its core, the investigation into Haleigh's disappearance became less about naming a single suspect and more about confronting uncertainty. Without definitive physical evidence, attention shifted to behavior, interviews dissected, tone analyzed, inconsistencies scrutinized for hidden meaning. Despite interrogations, public debate, unrelated arrests, and rumored jailhouse statements, one fact remains unchanged. No court has determined what happened inside that mobile home. No body has confirmed her fate. No forensic sequence has closed the narrative. So the question remains, was the truth intentionally hidden, or did it vanish amid panic and confusion? After years of silence and suspicion, what is that silence protecting a person? A mistake, or nothing at all? In the months after Haleigh vanished, the search widened beyond swamps and wooded trails. Detectives began examining something less visible, but equally important: the private lives inside that modest mobile home in Satsuma. Physical landscapes can be combed and mapped. Human dynamics are far more complicated. What investigators uncovered did not deliver clarity. Instead, it deepened the uncertainty surrounding the case. As authorities retraced the family's recent history, instability surfaced in fragments. Employment pressures, financial strain, and shifting relationships formed a backdrop to the disappearance. None of these factors proved wrongdoing, but they created context. In missing child investigations, context matters. It shapes opportunity, motive, and vulnerability. And in this case, the domestic environment became as significant as any physical crime scene. Reports suggested drug activity circulated within parts of the extended social circle. At the time, methamphetamine use was not uncommon in certain areas of Putnam County. Some individuals connected to the household had prior arrests or legal troubles. Rumors moved quickly through the small community. Once they began, they multiplied, weaving suspicion into everyday conversation. Financial hardship added further strain. Runner worked long hours to support the household. Misty, only 17, had stepped into a caregiving role that many believed exceeded her maturity and life experience. Two small children depended entirely on the adults around them. Responsibility, pressure, and youth formed a volatile combination, not evidence of guilt, but a fragile foundation. Investigators explored whether anyone else had entered the home that night. Friends, acquaintances, or visitors, not initially disclosed, became subjects of interest. There were no surveillance cameras capturing movement, no digital logs, no neighborhood footage preserving a timeline. If someone crossed the threshold, invited or uninvited, there was no technological record to confirm it. In a case defined by absence, silence carried weight. Misty Crossland remained central to investigative scrutiny. During multiple interviews, elements of her account shifted. Details about locked doors, waking during the night, and the sequence of discovery evolved over time. Detectives understand that inconsistencies can emerge for many reasons. Determining which reason applies is the difficult part. Inconsistencies may signal deception. They may signal confusion. They may reflect trauma. Behavioral experts note that memory under stress is unstable, particularly for adolescents. Sleep disruption, fear, and shock can fracture recall. A frightened teenager under repeated questioning might unintentionally alter details. Yet shifting narratives can also suggest concealment. Distinguishing between stress and strategy is rarely straightforward. Despite scrutiny of interviews, physical evidence inside the mobile home did not clearly indicate a violent struggle. There were no broken windows, no confirmed forced locks, no documented blood evidence establishing an attack. Bedding appeared undisturbed. Objects remained in place. If an abductor entered from outside, remarkable stealth would have been required. Equally unsettling was the alternative. If events began inside the home, they left no forensic trace strong enough to support charges. No definitive physical link established homicide. The absence of evidence did not confirm innocence, but it prevented resolution. Both scenarios, an invisible intruder or an unseen domestic event, remained plausible, and deeply troubling. Haleigh was 5 years old. Descriptions portray her as affectionate and protective of a younger brother. She required attention due to mild health concerns. She was not known to wander. She was not a child who left home alone in the dark. February nights in Florida can turn cold before dawn. Voluntary departure seemed improbable to investigators. There were no reports of behavioral problems or documented threats, no confirmed indication she feared someone specific. Her profile suggested vulnerability rather than rebellion. If she left that house, investigators believed it was unlikely to have been by choice. That realization narrowed the field of possibilities considerably. Years later, new whispers revived public interest. While incarcerated on unrelated charges, Misty allegedly made statements to fellow inmates referencing the night Haleigh disappeared. Accounts varied widely. Some claimed admissions of knowledge, others described expressions of regret. None were recorded confessions verified by independent evidence. Jailhouse testimony is notoriously unreliable. Inmates may exaggerate or fabricate stories for attention or leverage. Investigators treated such claims cautiously. Without corroboration, they could not sustain prosecution. Rumors, no matter how persistent, remain legally insufficient. The standard for closing a case is higher than speculation. No body has ever been recovered. No forensic chain conclusively established homicide. No admission met the legal threshold required to file charges directly tied to Haleigh's disappearance. As a result, the file remained open. The unanswered questions accumulated rather than resolved. Over time, the case came to represent broader systemic fractures. Poverty, addiction, unstable relationships, and limited resources intersected in one vulnerable household. Missing child investigations often expose deeper social fault lines. In Satsuma, the disappearance became not only a mystery, but a reflection of community fragility. Residents divided in belief. Some remained convinced an outside predator exploited an unlocked door in a quiet town. Others believed the truth never crossed the threshold of that home. Law enforcement publicly maintained that no one had been ruled out. That phrase carried weight. It implied proximity and possibility without accusation. One of the most haunting aspects of the case is its timeline. There is no verified evidence placing Haleigh alive outside the home after that. February night in 2009, no confirmed sightings, no financial activity, no physical recovery. In missing person cases, the last confirmed moment often shapes the entire investigation. Here, that final point ends inside a small bedroom. If the decisive event occurred within those walls, the intruder theory weakens. If it did not, someone removed a child without leaving a trace. Years later, uncertainty still outweighs answers. Until new evidence emerges, the truth remains suspended. Somewhere between memory and fact, between suspicion and proof. Somewhere in the quiet space of that mobile home before sunrise, where the timeline stops and the answers begin to fade. When evidence fades, speculation tends to rise. Years after Haleigh Cummings vanished, investigators, reporters, and the public still examined competing explanations. Each theory tries to answer the same unresolved question: what occurred inside that mobile home before dawn on February 10, 2009? None of these possibilities has been proven, and none has been conclusively dismissed by investigators. Every theory presents a sequence of events that appears plausible on the surface, yet each also depends on assumptions, missing evidence, or unverified statements. Those gaps, small but critical, are what prevents speculation from becoming certainty. Theory A: personal motive from someone close. 1. Prevailing theory suggests that someone within the immediate household, or closely connected to it, was responsible for Haleigh's disappearance, whether through conflict, anger, or a moment of panic. Investigators did not publicly confirm definitive evidence of forced entry, which naturally narrowed the focus to individuals who already had access to the home. Misty's shifting accounts of that night further intensified scrutiny. As details about the door, her sleep, and the sequence of discovery changed across interviews. From an investigative standpoint, proximity matters. Those inside the residence had uninterrupted access to the children, without the need to bypass locks or risk alerting neighbors. Criminal cases involving children often begin with those closest to them. As statistics consistently show, harm is more likely to come from someone familiar rather than a stranger. Access and opportunity, therefore, made the household a logical focal point. Yet significant weaknesses complicate this theory. There has been no publicly confirmed forensic evidence, no definitive blood findings, no DNA match, no physical trace directly implicating anyone inside the home in violence. No remains have been recovered. Without a body or corroborating physical proof, establishing homicide, let alone identifying a perpetrator, becomes profoundly difficult. Logical suspicion alone cannot substitute for evidence. Theory B: accident turned into a cover-up. Another hypothesis proposes that an accidental injury occurred inside the home, followed by panic that escalated into concealment rather than confession. Under this scenario, a fall, a moment of harsh discipline, or even a medical emergency may have triggered fear. In high-stress situations, especially among inexperienced caregivers, poor decisions can compound rapidly. Shifting statements could then reflect an attempt to manage consequences rather than premeditated harm. The broader household environment adds context to this possibility. Financial pressure, youth and limited maturity, strained relationships, and allegations of substance use within the wider social circle may have increased volatility. In many historical cases, cover-ups have stemmed not from initial intent to harm, but from fear of legal punishment, social judgment, or irreversible personal consequences. Panic, once activated, can drive actions that deepen tragedy. Yet this theory faces significant logistical challenges. Concealing a body without detection is complex and risky, potentially requiring coordination, transportation, and long-term silence. Maintaining a consistent false narrative over many years would be even more difficult. Additionally, investigators did not publicly report clear forensic indicators of a large-scale cleanup. While the theory addresses psychological motives, it struggles when examined through practical and evidentiary lenses. Theory C's stranger abduction. Another theory proposes that an unknown individual entered the home overnight and abducted Haleigh. Florida has seen non-family child abductions, and rural areas can offer isolation for offenders. Misty stated the back door was unlocked or open, potentially providing access. If true, an experienced offender could have acted quickly and quietly, without immediately alerting anyone inside. However, investigators did not publicly confirm clear signs of forced entry such as broken locks or damaged windows. The absence of visible disturbance complicates the theory. While an unlocked door reduces the need for force, it does not eliminate the inherent risks involved in entering an occupied home during the night. Satsuma is a small community where movement at 3 a.m. could attract attention from neighbors or passing vehicles. Despite years of investigation, no confirmed external suspect has been publicly identified. As a result, this theory remains possible, but it depends largely on what cannot be proven rather than on concrete evidence. Theory D: someone unexpected from her circle. Another possibility centers on a peripheral acquaintance, someone familiar to the household, but not an immediate caregiver or resident. This individual may have known the family's routines, understood the layout of the home, and drawn little suspicion at first. A trusted friend or associate could potentially enter without causing alarm, particularly if doors were occasionally left unlocked or visits were common. Such a scenario could explain the absence of forced entry. If the person was welcomed or expected, there would be no need to break locks or create visible damage. It might also clarify potential gaps in early interviews. If someone's presence that evening was minimized, forgotten, or intentionally omitted, it could distort the timeline and complicate investigators' understanding of events. Yet this theory also faces limitations. Authorities have not publicly confirmed verified testimony placing a third party inside the home that night. No forensic evidence has been released, tying an outside acquaintance to the child's disappearance. As a result, this explanation occupies a middle ground, neither fully internal nor entirely random, sustained more by possibility than proof. When comparing the four primary theories, opportunity emerges as the central factor. Explanations involving someone inside the home or within the family's circle account more naturally for the lack of forced entry and the controlled environment, requiring fewer unknown variables. The stranger theory carries risk, yet remains possible. The accidental cover-up theory relies on secrecy sustained without mistakes. Statistically, cases involving young children often involve someone familiar to them, but probability is not proof. There is no conclusive physical evidence publicly tying any single theory to that night. Without a body, a verified confession, or definitive forensic confirmation, the case remains suspended between logic and doubt, hidden behind a door that may or may not have been locked. In unsolved cases, silence does not merely exist, it accumulates. It gathers in interview rooms long after the chairs are empty. It settles into court transcripts where decisive words never appear. It stretches across years, turning unanswered questions into permanent fixtures. In the disappearance of Haleigh Cummings, silence has endured longer than many imagined possible. There has been no verified confession, no confirmed recovery of remains, no definitive forensic revelation that reshapes the narrative. Instead, there is distance, a widening space between that February night in 2009 and the present day. Time moves forward. The silence remains. Yet silence is not the absence of substance. It carries psychological weight. It shapes public perception. It influences investigative direction. In many child disappearance cases, statistics point inward toward family members, caregivers, or acquaintances. Proximity creates opportunity. Familiarity lowers defenses. Patterns offer probability, though never certainty. But human behavior resists simple equations. Stress fractures memory. Fear alters speech. Shame can distort recollection. Individuals under pressure may contradict themselves without intending deception. Others may withhold information out of panic rather than malice. Psychology reminds us that crisis does not produce clarity. It often produces fragmentation. If something tragic occurred inside that home, intentional or accidental, the aftermath would not be confined to a single moment. The human mind responds to perceived collapse with survival strategies. Behavioral research suggests that when individuals fear imprisonment, rejection, or irreversible consequence, concealment can feel like preservation. Silence, in that state, is not calm. It is defense. Yet silence also belongs to the innocent. Those subjected to suspicion may retreat inward. Public accusation can breed guarded language, legal caution, and emotional withdrawal. Memory under interrogation may become hesitant, even fragmented. Silence can reflect trauma as easily as guilt. This dual nature creates a paradox. Silence may signal responsibility. Silence may signal fear. Silence may signal psychological injury. Without corroborating evidence, interpretation becomes projection. Observers often see what they are predisposed to believe. Beyond psychology lies philosophy. What is truth when it cannot be demonstrated? In legal systems, truth must meet evidentiary standards. It must be documented, corroborated, admissible. But reality is not bound by courtroom thresholds. Something either happened or it did not, regardless of whether it can be proven. Some philosophical traditions suggest that truth exists independently of discovery. It does not depend on acknowledgement. It does not dissolve because evidence is insufficient. It waits, sometimes indefinitely, beneath layers of confusion, denial, or decay. From a Buddhist perspective, suffering arises from ignorance, not merely from lack of information, but from misunderstanding the nature of reality. An unresolved disappearance generates collective suffering because it leaves perception fractured. Without clarity, grief cannot fully mature. Loss cannot fully settle. Ignorance, in this sense, is not passive. It is active tension. It stretches between what is known and what is suspected. It prevents closure because meaning remains unfinished. Communities, like individuals, seek narrative completion. Silence denies them that structure. Western philosophy approaches the dilemma differently. If truth exists but cannot be verified, what is its status? Is it meaningful only when revealed? Or does it retain moral weight in obscurity? The disappearance of a child forces these questions into lived experience rather than abstract debate. Religious traditions add another layer. Within Christian theology, wrongdoing carries consequence beyond legal exposure. Confession is not solely procedural. It is redemptive. Guilt, unacknowledged, becomes spiritual burden. Repentance restores moral alignment. But what becomes of wrongdoing when confession never arrives? Does guilt dissipate with time, or does it deepen in silence? Faith does not resolve evidence. Philosophy does not produce forensic results. Psychology does not identify perpetrators. Yet each lens reveals how silence transforms from investigative gap into existential presence. For families of missing children, ambiguity is often described as more painful than confirmed death. Grief psychology calls this ambiguous loss, a condition in which a loved one is neither fully alive in present reality nor fully gone in confirmed absence. Mourning cannot stabilize because hope and despair coexist. Communities experience ambiguous loss collectively. A town becomes defined by an unfinished sentence. Each passing year adds emotional sediment. The question remains, suspended in conversation, anniversaries, and quiet remembrance. Silence thickens. Time erodes memory, but it sharpens technology. Advances in DNA analysis have solved cases once considered impossible. Trace evidence previously deemed unusable can now yield profiles. Genealogical databases have identified suspects decades after crimes occurred. Cold cases are not inert. They evolve with science. Witness memory also changes. Distance from an event can reduce fear or loyalty. Sometimes time loosens restraint, allowing withheld details to surface. Silence, while durable, is rarely permanent. It may fracture unexpectedly through conscience, conflict, or technological revelation. There is another dimension, communal silence. In small communities, information circulates quietly. Loyalty to friends, reluctance to implicate neighbors, or fear of public scrutiny can suppress crucial observations. A vehicle noticed at an unusual hour, a comment made in passing. Small details can alter trajectories. Investigators understand this. They know silence may conceal fragments waiting for the right conditions to emerge. Patience becomes strategy. The central question remains, is silence a sign of innocence or a shield for something hidden? Without evidence, certainty becomes dangerous. Psychology cautions restraint. Philosophy maintains that truth exists, even when unseen. Faith speaks of moral consequence, and law requires proof. Yet proof has not spoken clearly. What unsettles most is not only what may have happened, but what cannot be resolved. Each theory seems plausible, yet each collapses under scrutiny. In the end, silence is not emptiness, it is a presence that shapes belief and sustains doubt, until evidence breaks that stillness through discovery, confession, or technological advance. The case remains suspended, not closed, not solved, not forgotten, just waiting, as if truth itself stands behind a door that may or may not have been locked, existing fully, yet unseen, while the world listens for a sound that has not yet come. More than 15 years have passed. No remains have been recovered, and no conviction has brought legal closure. What endures is absence, an empty bed, a family forever altered, and a question that refuses to loosen its grip on time. The disappearance of Haleigh Cummings is a reminder that uncertainty can be more haunting than resolution. The most unsettling possibilities are not always distant or dramatic. Sometimes they reside within ordinary spaces, behind familiar doors. Time has not dissolved the mystery. It has deepened its contours, sharpening the silence rather than softening it. If you believe unresolved cases still matter, continue engaging with stories that seek clarity where none has yet been found. Share this discussion, reflect on the questions, and remain attentive to the pursuit of truth. Some crimes leave no audible alarm, only enduring doubt, and sometimes silence reverberates longer than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mind.